A warm welcome to our today's online talk, Governing Artificial Intelligence, Enhancing Trust Through Regulations. We will look with you at AI governance from different perspectives. On one which makes the case for governing laws to counter challenges, risks, and threats, and another one which explores trust in governance of AI and how that relates to soft law in particular. Please welcome with me Hilary Sutcliffe, Director at SocietyInside, and also Director at the TIGTech initiative. And also a warm welcome to Paul Wang, CEO and co-founder at ZeNPulsar. Thank you both for being with us today. I am Marianne Schörling, and I will be moderating our session alongside Dr. Ekkehard Ernst, president of our Think and Do Tank. In a nutshell, we are combining the thinking and doing towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we look at how new technologies, such as AI, can support a sustainable future, and therefore developed with our initiative Geneva Impacts, a new venture builder approach that is currently coining the world of impact creating investment. In my function as head of stakeholder engagement, but also someone who believes in the power of collective intelligence, I would love to invite you to our upcoming event next Thursday on the 6th of December, where we will kickstart our new innovation process and choose the thematic focus for the innovations we built in 2022. At the beginning of next year, we will continue with the design thinking process. And yeah, this is our second innovation round, and it's an excellent opportunity to build smart and actionable impact projects. If you would like to know more about our work, kindly visit us online. You have here the QR code and join our event. Registrations are still open. So, well, AI is on our agenda today, and it's not only today, it's since quite a while now. Last summer, we hosted at the Geneva Macro Labs a virtual conference on AI and the future of work. And it became very clear that irrespectively which field of application we look at, without proper AI governance, AI projects are destined to fail. So how far can regulations enhance trust in AI, and which role does soft law play? In order to explore possible answers, we have organized our discussion today the following way, and we prepared the following agenda for you. We will have first Paul Wang. He will reflect on the disruptive effects of AI on the very fabric of society. Paul asked about who is in the center of empowerment, empower AI or empower humans. AI and other advanced technologies form an integral part of our daily lives, and they present not only great benefits and opportunities to help us humans, but also expose us with new challenges, risks, and threats. And while these are important aspects that many already have looked at, we would like to go with you today a step further and see how the field of technology surveillance is evolving. Paul, I very much look forward to your insight on how humans can still be on the driver's seat. Our second speaker, Hilary Sutcliffe, will then talk about appropriate values, ethics, and governance structures for AI, specifically with the focus of being trustworthy. Hilary and her colleague Sam Brown just published an article on trust and soft law for AI, which I can warmly recommend. Hilary will base her interventions today on some golden nuggets of this publication, which is literally hot off the press as it got published yesterday by IEEE. Congratulations, Hilary. And yeah, I'm very keen to take a dive with you into what may be done differently when earning trust is considered a part of the development of AI, soft law, and ethical governance. During the presentation of each speaker, each of them will have about 10 minutes. We welcome you to already put your questions into the chat box of this Zoom meeting room. And after the speakers' input, we will go right into that discussion, and you will be able to exchange directly with Paul and Hilary today. That's actually my favorite part of the online talks. Paul, over to you. Lovely to have you with us today. A few words about your background. The most recent addition to your professional role portfolio is that you are CEO and co-founder of ZeNPulsar, a company that responds to the integrity threats posed by online disinformation campaigns and harmful narratives. But you are also, and I had to make a list to remember everything, entrepreneur, a seasoned speaker, a blockchain enthusiast, a senior executive, a cybersecurity advocate, a university lecturer in economic crime investigation, and you're acting as mediator in dispute cases. Wow, what a list. I was surprised also when I learned that you worked as well in forensic examination. Over the last 20 years, you served as partner, regional head of fraud investigation and dispute services at a Big Four firm company, and you were also head of forensic technology and discovery services. And your regulation, legal and fintech expertise you gathered at Big Four companies allowed you to build on your masters of computer sciences from APFL, and you also earned certificates in blockchain technologies from the MIT Sloan School of Management and the like. So welcome, and we are proud at the GeneMarco Labs that you're also serving as head of corporate governance. Now, Paul, you engaged on many questions around the governance of AI and the danger that comes when we fail in putting regulations in practice is that AI is not anymore a black box it used to be. Can you tell us more? Where do we stand in our discussion around the human factor? Can we still be on the driver's seat, and who is taking the lead in the governance of AI? Over to you.
Thank you very much. So I hope I can share the screen. Yes. Can see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So thank you very much for that introduction, Marianne. Really appreciate to be part of this journey. So it is totally right. I mean, the AI right now has been totally embedded into everyone's life. So I'd like to go through the benefits, the opportunities, but at the same time, the challenges that everyone is exposed to, especially our kids, the risks and also the threats. And at the end of the day, is that how can we as human, hopefully we're still humans, can be on the driver's seat. It's true that also nowadays a lot of people are making presentations. Well, not a lot, but a handful number of people are making presentations out of an avatar. So it's not the right person who's presenting, but it's the avatar of the person. And it looks real, just like fake videos. But I can guarantee you, I'm really sitting in front of the screen right now. So it's not my NFT or my avatar who's presenting. And I hope to be able to carry on with those kind of live discussions in the future. So what is AI? I'll derive into like 3 different types of artificial intelligence. So the artificial narrow intelligence that everyone knows about it because it's totally embedded in the tool, in the software, in the hardware that everybody's using. For example, the mobile phone, there's AI. You use Siri to interact with your phone. You use Alexa to interact with the Amazon box or Cortana. So this is already embedded into your life, in a daily life, without knowing it necessarily, but at least making use of it. Whenever you enter some Google search on Google, you type a few keywords, and you often see additional keywords that are coming afterwards as suggestion. Or, for example, when you're typing emails, say, okay, best. When after typing best, often comes best regards, because the machine knows that. From a popularity, what are the next keywords that are being proposed? And this is totally governed by AI and machine learning. We are using it on a permanent basis. Then comes the artificial general intelligence, which refers to a computer that is as smart as a human across the board, which is becoming already quite interesting, but also scaring. If it's as smart, it can do whatever the human can. And the last one, the scariest one, is the artificial super intelligence, ASI, which means that something from a machine perspective, is surpassing the behavior, the knowledge, and the capacity of a human in every field. People are still working on that. Hopefully, I wouldn't say hopefully we'll get into that, but hopefully we can still manage that. We can still govern it and making a proper use. But for sure, what comes with technology, such as AI, people are doing good things like AI for good, but also the fraudsters or the hackers or the organized crimes are also using AI for wrong purposes. One of the benefits I would like to name, it's about health, the augmented health diagnostics. Everyone has been confronted like the past 2 years about the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, now using models. They're still being trained because it's pretty recent, but using models by looking into scanners, the lung scan of the people using AI, they can pretty modelize to a rate of like above 90% whether the result of the scan is actually represents COVID-19. The one that I'm showing you right now is the AI system for breast cancer screening. And these models have served between the US and also the UK with different kind of methodology. But the point which I want to make is that using AI, you can provide a very fast diagnosis. The breast cancer in 3 years in the UK, they managed to make it more specific and to be able to identify it early enough. Same thing in the US. So it follows really the same model. And so that's a way to measure the benefit of AI, which brings additional value. You can help, AI can help finally the doctors in order to shorten the time for diagnostic and to enhance the identification ability. Then there are opportunities for sure. What comes with AI? One of the topics that we're working on is about disinformation. AI can help counter the spread of disinformation. This has been built by the MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and it uses machine learning to model, to interpret information that are being spread across the network. And with that, it is quite possible, I wouldn't say perfect, but still very possible to identify disinformation campaigns, who are the ringleaders, who's spreading the wrong information, who are following, who's retweeting. And that's a system that has been already trained over and over on social media. It's very important to train them with real data, with correct data. So the human will be there to provide the correct data. One of the issues that we heard, I think probably 2 years ago, was Amazon was using AI for recruitment processes. And the results were 2/3 of the selected resume were men and 1/3 women. So there was a quite unbalanced, although using AI. But how they figured out afterwards is that the models that they injected into the AI systems were already biased. And they found out that the initial numbers of CVs, of resumes that were injected were composed of 2/3 of men and 1/3 of women. And that's a typical example. If you provide the wrong input, the output will also be wrong. But at least it will help you screen them. But you have to make it right, and that's the human liability and responsibility. Another example that we clearly are working on is the market manipulation. We use the AI, machine learning, and neural networks to train the models based on existing models, based on retrained one, in order to identify the financial market manipulation and the crypto market manipulation. So what we do is to provide a correlation between like price, volume, and also the media which is being posted. You've all seen GameStop or even the Bitcoin. They are like the wrong narratives that will push people to buy. And the more people buy it, the higher the price will be. And so that's why nowadays, based on the amount of information and data that are being spread and posted over social media, whether it's Twitter, Reddit, or any kind of like other news media, it is very important to distinguish what is wrong and what is authentic. And the human himself or herself is not able to do that in a very efficient way because it's spreading very fast. To take one very quick example is that we literally, whenever we browse on social media, we literally take 5 seconds before either retweeting or liking it. And you've seen, I mean, kids or even adults, whenever they hold their phone, and they just swipe, they swipe, they swipe. And whenever there's a picture that they like, let's say of a cat, whether it's an authentic one or a fake one, they will like it or retweet it. So you see, I mean, it's becoming part of our human behavior, this fact of liking any kind of information that are being posted. So what are the threats? Those can be interpreted as opportunities, but also threats. And we talk about security surveillance. That's a typical example of what China is doing with regards to their citizens and also with regards to tourists. What they do is that they assign a number. This is a number that they only know, which they are able then to interpret whether the person is actually good or is not good. So that's why, for example, green ones are the ones that are okay, and the red one potentially not. So this is for security surveillance, but it is scary because you can always say, okay, well, what if the government is using this for repression perspective and no one can really prevent it? What is being used as tool, there's a company in China called Skynet, a little bit similar to the movie Terminator that I hope most of you have seen about Skynet, the rise of the machine. Skynet is the one providing artificial intelligence empowered system to track down like criminals, to really make a full surveillance of a car, of faces, in order to identify whether the person of interest is actually a criminal or a petty theft. This is done on a permanent basis, and Skynet provide this kind of services directed to the government. There's also another one called Sharp Eyes, similar approach, and also SenseTime. There's another aspect which is becoming very interesting, is the citizen scoring. This is very popular in China. People, whenever they have a high score, they will even advertise it to mention that I have a higher score than my neighbor or so. This is totally done also by AI with machine. So as long as you behave well, you get a good citizen score. If you don't, the surveillance camera that are running around in China are able to identify probably in real time about 20 faces at the same time, in real time. And they are able to quantify who's good or who's bad. I mean, that's according to their definition of good and bad. It looks very scary. However, people in China are very used to it, and they even advertise their citizen score. This is the number of cameras. That is a study based in 2019, so it's already 2 years old, I would say. But at that time, it was expected for China to have close to 600,000 surveillance, 600 million cameras implemented on the Chinese land. That means for 2 citizens, there's 1 camera. And if you think about the camera able to monitor 20 faces on real-time basis, it looks very scary. You are being tracked, and everyone is being tracked. The evolution will be, let's say, by 2030, probably 1 camera, 1 person. So how fast it can go. At least in China, they use it. They don't hide their usage. And they also mention this is really for like surveillance purposes, not for repression. But what's the barrier between repression and surveillance? That can be totally interpreted and also misused, and especially according to the human rights. Another one, the weaponization and the lack of governing laws. And the left picture was taken from a movie which I like called Angel Has Fallen. And you see this is a, I think, 2018 or 2019 movie, but at that time they were using drones to attack like the president of the United States and also his bodyguards. And you will see drones that are totally being automated, that are able to capture and to kill the person of interest. This is a call of weaponization. And at the same time, the US Pentagon software chief says China has already won the AI battle. That is dated already, I mean, a few months ago. We all know that AI is preserved. The technology of AI, especially for democratic countries, they have been preserved. In other non-democratic country, and that's another story. And so that's even an affirmation that the Pentagon ex-software chief has mentioned. We were talking about surveillance. There's a company in China called Dahua Technologies, which is able to monitor with probably something like 99% of success rates everyone on the streets. And this technology is being implemented in a lot of surveillance camera. And you see, that was dated only last week, the US government agencies, despite the federal ban on buying Chinese surveillance tech, they did buy it. And if you look at the, feel free to look at the link, because it really explains which government agencies in the US have bought the Chinese surveillance tech. And you see, even in its own country, the US has enacted a federal ban. But however, there are still agencies actually not applying this federal ban. So do we say it's a lack of governing laws? No, there are governing laws. However, it's a lack of like applicability or compliance with it. And who will punish or sanction? No one will sanction those governmental agencies. Another news that has been announced only last month is an Australian firm called what is it called? I forgot the name, but Clearview. The Australian firm is being used on many surveillance camera, for example, in the UK. And 2 years ago in the UK, the population, the citizen of UK and the government said that they shouldn't use those Clearview because it's against human rights again. And now this Australian firm, they are facing possible 17 million £17 in privacy fine because they are handling personal data in the UK. That's a typical example. However, some will say that 17 million £17 is nothing for such a big company. So the laws are always a little bit behind, like not one step, but like 2 steps behind technology. So how do we empower humans? How do we make sure that the humans are still on the driver's seat? Some people, I mean, the examples I showed you do empower AI. There's a number of initiatives that is called, for example, the Artificial Intelligence and Democratic Values from the Center for AI and Digital Policy. That's very important. They are addicting a number of regulations, a number of compliance, but at least this is a typical example of recommendation. Will the private companies apply them? That's a different story. But who needs to be on the driver's seat? Humans, to be able to monitor the fact that companies are doing it. There's also a call for an international ban on the weaponization of artificial intelligence. And if you look on social media, the hashtag called #BankKillerAI is a hashtag which is very popular nowadays. And it is very important to really ensure that the weaponization of AI is being totally banned, not only on a local level, but also international one. However, and that's the downside, the US has rejected the calls for regulating or banning killer robots. So you see such a power if they reject it, they won't be part of it. So it creates discrepancy, it creates like non-standardization, even though there are still laws that are banning the weaponization of robots, of robots. Some countries are still against it. So how can we progress? That's a typical question. And to finish off, there's a Congress, International Congress of Penal Law, which is taking place in 2 years' time. And the main topic is AI and criminal justice. There's a number of questions related to legal problems, whether AI falls into some existing categories, and we need an interdisciplinary approach. What is extremely more important nowadays is to have the cooperation with private and public sector. The regulations are still very important. Some people see it as a barrier to stop progressing in technology. Actually, it's not. It is becoming extremely important to make sure that governing laws are still there, whether it takes a year, 2 years, or even 3 years, but at least the majority of those people who are dictating laws, they are the ones who should also be on the driver's seat to monitor that private sector companies are really following and complying with this. And then sanctions related. At the end of the day, we often talk about money and the fact that if a sanction is high enough to limit the fact or to frame the private company who's misusing AI or who doesn't comply with those kind of regulation, it needs to be substantial enough to hinder or to make sure that the private company will adhere to it. So with that note, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Marianne and to Hilary.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. So one of your main points, if I understood it correctly, is that poor regulations or regulations which are good in theory but never applied to risks we definitely should prioritize when we respond to the so-called surveillance capitalism. Now, you also alluded to one factor that changes the nature of AI implementation and its governance, which is trust. And that brings us to Hilary. Hilary, in your latest publication for IEEE that I just have mentioned at the beginning during the intro, you built a bridge between trust in AI governance and the effectiveness of rules, regulations, and standards. Your reflection on the soft law approach is informed by an initiative called the Trust in the Governance of Technology Initiative, the TIGTech initiative, which exactly looks at what happens if we include efforts towards trustworthiness and earning trust in AI in governance, institutions, and design. So when we heard about your initiative that you co-founded several years ago, we were determined to invite you over to our talk today. Before you will tell us more about your work, let me properly introduce you, and I can see you already have the slides here. Hilary, you join us today from the UK, where you run the London-based nonprofit SocietyInside. The name is a riff of the famous brand Intel Inside, and its focus is the desire that innovation should have the needs and the values of people and the planet at its heart, not simply the making of money or scientific kudos. Hilary, you explore the issues of trust, ethics, values, and governance of technology from nanotech and neurotech to AI through collaborative research. You're exploring the trustworthy process design, public speaking, online training, coaching, mentoring, and acting as a critical friend to organizations of all types. And among others, you are on the Carnegie Council for AI and Equality Initiative. And I will share the link in the chat shortly, because I think that's something really worth to explore for our audience. And some final last words. You are the director of the TIGTech initiative, which explores the trustworthiness, which I already mentioned, but you also previously served as co-chair of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Values, Ethics, and Innovation, and you are a member of its Agile Governance Council. Last but not least, we congratulate you for recently being named one of the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics for 2021. That's quite an achievement. Congratulations. Hilary, it seems to me that AI governance remains for too many organizations an afterthought, or even worse, building on Paul's presentation. When we look at AI governance through the lens of trust, how, in your opinion, can we detach governance from hype and ideology and instead focus on the public interest?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I want to make a quick observation on trust to Paul's there, because one thing we've got to remember is that, and I'm going to go into my time here, aren't I? Trust, AI doesn't exist in a vacuum. So you took that breast cancer idea of breast cancer, which is really basically pattern recognition software. So it's not very deep tech AI, but there's a trust chain on that. So for example, the hospital has to trust that technology in order to buy it. The clinician has to trust it in order to use it. And, if you're going to get in the way of their expertise and they're going to become just the tools of tech, they don't use it. The person has to trust the clinician and trust the technology. And if they've heard about AI and this and not working, they don't trust that. I'm doing some work for the Irish National Health Service. And if they don't trust therapies, they don't turn up. They don't turn up to the clinician, and they don't turn up for the surgery. And also they have to trust the system and trust the governance. So there is this little trust chain there that's not all about, here's AI and the world will come to it. There's lots of things that can get in the way of that. So let me just share my screen here. And I'm hoping, are you seeing this here of mine?
Yeah,
and I actually get the slideshow up, and my 6 million open documents are now closing. So let me just tell you about this project, TIGTech. I was the founder of this and the deliverer of it. The World Economic Forum supported it, which meant I can say that, and they didn't give us any money, and that's about it. And Fraunhofer paid for it, and they also were our partners, Fraunhofer EC. And the sort of defining question of this was, how would tech governance differ if the earning of societal trust were considered systematically and incorporated? Because we all talk about trust in the tech, but actually people have got to trust the governance. And my partner in this project, who unfortunately didn't really get involved in the end, he worked for Monsanto and he busted his ass to get the governance of GMOs as brilliantly fantastic as it could. And you may or may not believe this, but it was quite good. And nobody trusted him still, and he wanted to know the answer to that. But then unfortunately got busy and we didn't really got to do that. So that was our defining question. So, interestingly, COVID has really helped me get this message across, because we've all seen that trust in the approval process of the vaccine was really important in terms of trust in the vaccine and hesitancy. And as Heidi Larson, the CEO of the Vaccine Hesitancy Project, says, we don't have a misinformation project, we've got a trust problem. So that's quite interesting. The trust and the governance are much more important than people thought, and people's views on the governance. And this little gift was given to me by Margareta Vestager at the launch of the AI regulations for the European Union. She said, an artificial intelligence trust is a must, not a nice to have. So I have a little article I wrote on that. But also quite interesting, that's it. Some work that's been done recently by our Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation about trust and COVID. And it's an interesting quote, I'll read you, just you can see it, but trust in the rules and regulations governing technology is the single biggest predictor of whether someone believes that digital tech has a role to play in COVID response. And that is taking all other factors into consideration. I thought that was quite interesting. And one I just got from this morning, except I keep pressing and it's not happening. So maybe I'll do that. Okay, I'll do that. This was the reasons for trusting UK food. And look, high standards of regulation in the UK was by far the leading reason that people trusted UK food. I thought that was quite interesting, because people think no one cares about regulation, no one trusts it, no one even gives it a thought, but they really do. And simultaneously, no, see, now it's going that way. Okay. And I just, what does trust look like? Now, this is my sister, but I'm putting a TIGTech conversation with Citizen. She's sort of saying, I'm looking at what does trust in governance look like? What does it mean when citizens trust governance? And she was saying, Hilary, I don't know why you're doing this project. I don't know what all the fuss is about. If something bad happens, I will hear about it on the news. And that's trust in governance, isn't it? The system has got it sorted. I don't have to worry. If it's bad, someone will tell me about it. And I quite like that. So very briefly going through our TIGTech project, does governance enhance trust? And how can regulation actually enhance trust in the technologies? And we have three sort of key findings. Citizens trust governance most when they know it's there, and they can see that it's working. And things like, they know it's there. If they don't know it's happening, how can they know to trust it? If they can't see it's working, how do they know to trust it? And the Food Standards Agency had a brilliant thing that happened to them, whereas they found that actually the most trust was when they would be seen to putting the baddies away. People understood that bad things happen in the food sector, but when the Food Standards Agency was seen to be catching those people and penalizing those people, their trust scores went quite through the roof. Actually, they measure trust on a regular basis. But can they trust AI governance? Because I don't know about your country, but in the UK, there is no communication about AI governance. Nobody knows, nobody even in the government knows who actually is governing AI. It's split between lots of different departments, biometrics, privacy, data, all different. So how do we as citizens know that we can trust AI and know how governance matters if we don't even know it's there? How can we even tell if it works? Because one of the things we know about governance and AI governance, it's really struggling with enforcement. And therefore, we're relying a lot on soft law. And that's the part of my article. Soft law relies on non-enforcement by government. It's self-governance mainly by companies. And I just want to point to you, no, why is this? It's never happened to me before this. My computer never does this. I wanted to just point to you. No, I can't point to you. Why can't I point to that, Marianne? Now, I'll give you that. I don't know why that's happening. This great project by ASU, Sandra Day O'Connor School, on soft law that works. And they've identified over 300 principles and soft law governance of AI. And they've evaluated them. And they're there, the whole lot of them are all there for you to see. And one of the things that they looked at was, when does soft law work? And soft law works best. It doesn't work most of the time, but when it does work, it works because regulation is coming, the threat of regulation is coming, the fear of regulation is coming, or the citizens really kick off and regulation surely will be coming, or insurers make them do it. So basically, regulation is the really thing that's working. And this sort of governance by threat is about as good as you'll get for soft law, they found. Now, the second biggest cause of distrust in governance is when it seems to prioritize money over people. So this idea that it's smoothing the path of tech and not standing up for the public interest. And this is a citizen dialogue, everyone says, but it's really complicated tech. And they're saying, the system's complicated isn't good enough. Lack of action. Find a way to do your job and make it work. And this was a thing for GMOs, that actually people felt that governance was all about smoothing the path for GMOs and not standing up for the public interest. And the third one, governance and regulation particularly doesn't do ethics and values well. And in fact, the biggest concerns about new technologies are ethics and values issues, the sorts of things that Paul's been talking about, the sorts of things we find with facial recognition, with gene editing, I'm doing quite a lot on neurotechnologies at the moment. We're worried about AI, and we really got to worry about that. So self-driving cars, all of these things, these are the ethicals and values issues, and governance and regulation is all about, here is a rule, you're in, you're out, you're doing it or you're not. And so new innovative forms of governance are coming in and having to come in to actually deal with these ethical and values issues. And you can't do that without involving people. And so a more inclusive approach to governance is needed. And I'm doing quite a lot of work on that, sort of collaborative governance approaches. And one of the things from the OECD, and there's some quite interesting reports coming out of the OECD at the moment, in terms of trust, people are more likely to trust a decision that's been influenced by ordinary people than one made solely by government or behind closed doors. And we're finding this in all sorts of ways. In climate change, we've heard about the Irish abortion referendum, really difficult, complex subjects where citizens are part of the decision-making process. And this is what's going to have to happen with these new technologies. But also citizens think that regulators are aloof and they're opaque and they're detached from the real world. No, surely not. And it's quite interesting in the UK, when I did a quick trawl of the regulators' websites in the UK, the Food Standards Agency is Britain's most trusted regulator, closely followed by the Human Fertilisation and Regulatory Authority. And they have got by far the best websites. They are communicating better than anybody else, and they're involving people better than anybody else. So again, to trust in governance, if they don't know about you, they can't see it, they don't know what's going on, they can fear the worst or they can fear the best, because people trust sort of systems. You either trust the system or you don't see the system. But if you don't trust the system, being in the dark makes things worse. So this is what citizens have said, and this is my analysis of about 20 public dialogues we analysed. Be more human, regulators, talk to us, be more visible, show the impact that you're having and show your effectiveness, and be more inclusive. Also, quite interestingly, help us help ourselves, educate and empower us, because regulators are a real trusted source of information. And actually, in this world of where nobody is trusted, an independent regulator is one of the few places that you may trust that information from them. And I thought that was quite interesting. Now, I'm just going to briefly look at these 7 drivers of trust. I'm not going to go into this now, but there was trust is a mess. And I did 8 months and none of the people on trust agreed. I looked at psychology, evolutionary biology, sociology, political science, behavioral science. It was a mess. But there was something really remarkable. They all agreed on these drivers of trust. There's probably about 12 because they're all, but I put them together. And it is unbelievable. These are what make society work. And if you were to look, when everything goes wrong, looking at Boris or looking at something else, one of those is there. And honestly, you can just tick them off. It's like a little parlor game. The public interest, so for regulators, these are, you have to, your intent is not to smooth the path of governance. It is the public interest. You're competent, you're effective, you're reliable, consistent, you're respectful, and that's respectful of all stakeholders. You're open and transparent and accessible. And you have integrity, you're operating honestly, you're impartial of vested interest, this idea of regulatory capture, and you're fair. Now, AI's got a lot of talk about fairness of the technology itself, but the fairness of the governance as well. And then inclusion, being collaborative, including others and involving others. And a lot of the work on the Agile Governance Council was, regulation by involving the business without avoiding capture, because regulations invented in a silo aren't going to work if they don't take into consideration the way businesses actually work. Or as my friend Roger calls it, who's a regulator and a compliance auditor, what actually happens? Regulators invent this regulation in a room and then the real world comes in and it's not fit for purpose. And I just wanted to talk to you about, there's 3 new competencies that we identified with this work that regulators and those designing governance will need. And this is not just regulators. If you're doing a, AI for good type soft law mechanism, this idea of evidence of trustworthiness as a new approach to communications. It's not about PR. It's about saying, this is the evidence of why we're trustworthy, why our governance works. Another interesting project we're doing with the Netherlands government, this idea of collaborative governance, building trusted environments, because actually there's all sorts of collaborations going on, but if no one trusts the process and no one trusts the convener and everybody's sitting there, not trusting anybody, then it's not going to go forward and you're not going to get an effective collaboration. And also, here I am. I'm also taking on this, I'm sort of nicking this phrase, nothing about us without us, from the disability rights community. Involving citizens in tech governance is probably the biggest thing I get asked to talk about. Mm-hmm. So those are the 3 competencies I think that regulators of the future need. And this is the great questions to you all. Is AI governance all set to earn societal trust? I'm not really sure it is. So I'd love to know what you think.
That's a great question. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you for your thoughts and your insights. As a side note to what you just have said, McKinsey just published this summer a very interesting article on the proposed EU rules to regulate AI, and came to the conclusion that the European Union might pave the way for a global AI regulation.
Yes.
I can't now wait for a second part. If you all agree, we will add another 15 minutes at the end of this webinar to allow for the Q&A session now. Ekkehard, over to you. Ekkehard is our president of our Think and Do Tank, and I'm very sure that the comments that we saw now in the chat will lead to a discussion where we are looking into how far AI is pushing regulatory and social boundaries, and that's going into the direction of your question, Hilary. Ekkehard, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Marianne, and thanks Hilary and Paul for these two really inspiring and excellent presentations. I mean, actually, I have to say that I found it really fascinating what you both had to present to us, and I hope that the community liked it as well. We already have some questions piling up, so I don't want to take too much time. I would like to start, and sorry for Michele if I jump your question first. I would like to start with Natalia, because I think she has a very relevant point that she wants to raise. So Natalia, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. Is she still there? Oh no, maybe she left already. Okay, but I mean, then I can maybe ask it for her. So Natalia had this really great question about how do we actually regulate in such a fast-paced environment? I mean, are we not always running behind in a sense to what is going to happen, especially when you think about self-regulation and soft law? I mean, are we kind of finding the right balance between regulation and catching up? Hilary, if you want to start, and maybe Paul, over to you then.
I was going to have Paul start that one. So I was on this World Economic Forum Agile Governance Council, and that was one of the things we looked at. And we hear about this a lot, and it's quite right that, you know, so there's two things to say. It's never as fast as, you know, people can always see it coming. You know, someone was talking to me that they've been looking at data privacy for 30 years. So there are certain aspects of AI that we've all known about, but we just didn't act on and didn't take any notice on. And then things like Facebook, you know, that was a bit of an unknown. I always think about Airbnb. Here they were, two guys with a mattress on the floor, renting it out. And then within 3 years, they're a threat to global tourism. So that's fair, and that is fair. But I think one of the things, there are instruments that are both hard law and soft law that can move quite quickly. And I think those are worth looking at. And things like sandboxes, which everyone talks about. I think, you know, even with AI, there's lots of perfectly good law there already. Human rights law in lots of ways, and privacy law and data law covers most of it already. Such a lot of that doesn't actually need to be reproduced. And I've seen some very good articles showing that the gaps for AI regulation are very, very small, actually. And we don't necessarily need to do technology regulation. We can do outcome regulation. We can do regulation in different ways. So this idea that we have to regulate anology is perhaps causing more problems than it needs to solve. But I would love to know Paul's view on that.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Natalia. To be able to collaborate between the private sector and the public sector, especially the regulators, the regulators needs to be educated by techies, need to be made aware of the risk and the threats. It's true that regulators, whenever you talk to a regulator, you have to talk in layman words. For sure, nowadays there are more and more technical experts that are participating to the standardization of law, etc. There are working groups. If I want to take a typical example of the working group that I sometimes attend at the ITU related to standardization of like new technology. I remember the first time I did attend one of the working groups, they were trying to define a term during the whole day, the 8 hours, just a term. At some point I said, okay, well, no one is going to wait 8 hours or spend 8 hours to define a term. it is very important to define a term for sure, especially if the standardized term is going to be served in other regulations across border for sure. But there are ways to move faster, and that's why the participation of private sectors like technical people, not to say, oh, the regulation should do this or that, is to talk through and to analyze it from the beginning, so that both end will end up in a win-win situation. And it's becoming even more important nowadays because tech is going faster than regulators. It's more important to involve the technical stakeholders and the technical actors. It is also very important to make sure that the technical, they don't take a part of it because they want to be seen as a leader in regulations. That's not the point. It's really to involve all the different parties to have the same understanding of what it brings and how it can be regulated. Nowadays, there are so many like regulations. I mean, usually too many will kill the regulation because there will be always like demonstrators that are fighting against the regulations or the standardization because they want to do their own way. But at least from a surveillance monitoring, I would say that an independent entity should be sitting on the board in order to moderate first, but also in order to standardize and create a community that both ends will talk together and understand. Because what we see is that, I mean, take one typical example. When a few years ago, when you saw the hearing that Mark Zuckerberg was standing in front of the Congress, and the Congress people were asking questions. And honestly, with all respect to those Congress people, I was thinking, okay, there's a huge gap between their understanding of what it does and the response that they want to hear. It's not the same as the response that Mark has expressed, but they were looking deliberately to some responses to their question, but their questions, unfortunately, I would say were formulated in an old-fashioned way.
Thank you. Actually, on this last point, I would say, I mean, what looks to me as well is that a lot of AI applications are just being developed in response to regulation, and not to actually make our lives in any way more comfortable. But I don't want to hold back the conversation. I know that Thala had a question as well. Thala, if you want to unmute yourself and come in.
Thank you so much, Ekkehard. Thank you, Ms. Sutcliffe, for your presentation, which I really enjoyed. My work involves inclusivity and engagement, in particular with civil society and stakeholders, not in the private sector. And if you look at the UN Food Systems Summit, which recently took place, and essentially was taken over by the private sector and small and medium enterprises pushing the ultra-processed food product agenda, AI has been the evidence in terms of the AI. The data is there to show that AI is so beneficial for local farmers in terms of tracking natural oncoming disasters, helping them in terms of efficiency, in terms of data collection, in terms of a number of things. And the evidence is there, and it's heavy on one side. How would you work to, and this is a question I have in my daily work, how do you translate the evidence that is so heavy on that scale to policy? Because if you only have the big private sector entities working with the regulators, and as Paul rightly said, you know, they are way more advanced than governments in terms of what they're doing, without an inclusivity hat on, because it's about business essentially. How do you inclusively translate all of this evidence into policy?
Yeah, very great question, and good for you that you're doing this, because it's so important. I mean, the overwhelming power imbalance, knowledge imbalance between the big companies, the regulators, and then the civil society is overwhelming. However, so civil society does punch above its weight. And I was on this Carnegie thing the other night, and actually the funding and capacity building of civil society is probably the most valuable and important thing that we can do for responsible tech. So, but from your point of view, how, you will know better than me, Talat, so I'm not giving you any answers that you don't know. But one of the things that I'm finding, obviously evidence of benefit and evidence of risk is the most important thing. So, look at climate change. We wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for the IPCC. We really wouldn't. It's the evidence of harm, the evidence of benefit that actually does change policy. So I would say try and get funding from the not-for-profits or who that you can get funding to do really hard evidence. And then you have to shout about it and use all the skills of the NGOs that you can muster. I had a little blog. I was talking about this with some people in AI, wondering if should we have an extinction rebellion for AI? Because part of the problem with AI is nobody understands what the hell it is. Nobody communicates what it is properly. Even the people in it are not very good at communicating what it is properly. And therefore, what that could do, something like Extinction Rebellion particularly, because they are very clear about what the problem is that needs to be solved. And they are very clear about what can be galvanized to make that happen. And I think maybe something like that for you, where you can really articulate the problem that needs to be solved, how this is worked, and then really make a big sort of a more public and a more sort of understandable and accessible fuss, because politicians like to respond to public fuss. So I think we need to be making more of a public fuss. That's not a great help though, Tara, I'm sorry. I'm looking at your photograph here rather than there, sorry.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
What do you think? What do you do? What works for you and what doesn't work for you?
One thing that doesn't work for me, and this is not a popular topic, but that the World Economic Forum's partnership with the United Nations several years ago, due to the shortfall by the United States government where I live, really put the UN in a non-neutral area where governance was essentially slowly taken over by multinational corporations. And you see that with the UN Food System Summit, which recently happened. You're going to see that very much in technology. And so I understand the push from the tech world and the private sector to achieve their agenda. The problem is that it's no longer in a neutral playing field. So that's something that I'm constantly dealing with.
Yeah. But I think NGOs since the history of time, to be honest, are also have had that, haven't they? And so I was on a thing about with the future of international NGOs, and they're really trying to rethink that. Maybe I can connect you with the future of international NGOs people, and you could tell them what's happened to you, and they could have a conversation.
Super, I'd love that. Thank you so much.
Send me an email, please.
Thanks for that. I think there is an interesting point that Patrick raised as well, and this is beyond, let's say, the question between private versus public regulation. It's also a question of which regulation from the public sector we actually want. So Patrick, if you want to come into that discussion here.
Yeah, thanks both Paul and Hilary for your presentations. They're very, very informative. I'm not as much of an expert as Tala on AI, I have to admit, but just on the points that you raised about China racing ahead in AI and the national security risk. I know that the US and EU are now like sitting up and taking note of the industries, and they're identifying them as key strategic areas. And I just want to know, are there any regulations or policies in the pipeline that you think are going to change the shape of the industry in the Western world anyway?
Paul?
So thank you, Patrick, for that question. One of the good things, personally, my thought about how China is dictating their policy that people in the Western world could leverage from. One of the things that I personally find very amazing is that technology that are being developed in China, they open it to other Western countries or to everyone to look at it almost in a transparent way, so that actually people can learn from it. So from a technology perspective, they do that. From a policy perspective, they have their own policy, which the Western world is not not really inclined, not even like a tiny bit, to implement in the Western world. But if I go back to the technology, I have one clear example: DJI drones. DJI drones as the most like well-known marketed and commercialized drones. And DJI provides, so DJI is Chinese, and they provide their technology in an open source way. So you have SDK, so software development kit, that you can use in order to change the program or adapt your DJI drone for your own purpose. And that is a typical example where they said, okay, well, we've developed those kind of technology, and feel free to amend. It's open for the public. People can adapt it and make it for their own good. So that's a way to communicate, say, okay, we are not hiding the technology. We are proposing for others to enhance it, to enhance it. If you think about like other brands like Parrot or other US-based drones, I don't think they will ever want to publish their technology for the sake of like preserving their intellectual property or so. So now with regards to policy, I think there's a clear difference that the policies that are applicable in one country, such as China, can or cannot be implemented in the Western world. The future policies, if we talk about standardization, if we talk about communication, they are probably like words or terminology that can be standardized, but take the policies like the raw policy that are being governed in one country and say, okay, we're going to use the same. I think according to the Western culture, it is too harsh. In my personal opinion, if instead of like recreating something from scratch, if a certain country like China or Southeast Asia country has a policy in place to govern the usage of technology, people should really seriously think about it and say how it can be adapted, tuned for the Western world, and don't try to recreate something from scratch, which is not going to be compatible, to be interoperable with the countries. Nothing to do with technology, but think about the policies related to the COVID-19 crisis right now. Everyone is addicting their own restrictions, and it creates a huge mess. One day we close, another day they say, okay, it needs to be quarantined. People can cancel their hotels to Switzerland. And then 2 days later, they say, oh, but you don't need to be quarantined anymore. So that creates an instability, and people are just saying, okay, well, if in one country it applies, why not make it like make it a standard?
Thank you.
Ekkehard's the one for that. Ekkehard, tell us about it.
So the framework, so the framework of the policy, all the different chapters of the policy should be taken because country have already thought about it. But the little aspect of how to implement, or based on the culture, or even based on like local laws, it needs to be tuned.
But that happens everywhere with all sorts of different laws. Food, AI is not that special, surely.
I'm a bit conscious of time. We are already running a bit late. So maybe Jan, if you want to put forward your last point, and then I hand it back to Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you, Ekkehard. When looking at systems that are used to detect something that a system cannot detect, so system cannot detect fake news. So that's far beyond the capability of a system to really research just by looking at a tweet whether the information contained is true or not. The system can, of course, be trained to discover some patterns, that it comes from somebody who has lied before, and therefore we assume that it's wrong. And this kind of pattern, of course, can be trained, and it works in a number of cases. But then we see what is the implication of such a system. It is maybe the answer is correct in 90% of the cases, but it actually mislabels true information as fake, and fake information as true at the same time. So we come into the trust issue. We have a system that is pretty good for reasons that has nothing to do with the system, what it should really do. And people relying on such a system making wrong judgment. And I think there's a difference to normal technology, like programmed systems, is that the developers that train those systems do not know what the system will do. When training a system, it creates some artifacts that will make the system fail, like the Tesla that's running into a truck. And it's obvious it's a truck, but it's obvious to us, but it has not been learned by the training because it's a little bit unusual. And these kind of artifacts happen when you train AI. And therefore, we need to have some regulation. I think the EU regulation is quite good in that it says, well, we have a technology that's insecure by default. You can't do anything. You can't make AI safe. It's not possible. But you can put it into a container that limits the damage that it can create.
So what you're saying actually is that the technology is very different from what we had before, and so we need a different type of regulation.
Exactly. And so I disagree with Hilary that we should ignore the technology, but have the same regulation for everything. But I think these systems that are kind of not controllable as systems that are programmed need some different kind of regulation, some different kind of treating it.
Okay, can I ask both of you very short answers to these complex questions? I know it's very challenging, but I guess you know exactly what you want to say. So if you can have some short final remarks, and then I give it back to Marianne. Thank you.
Maybe Hilary.
Oh God, I was hoping you would ask Paul first, and then I could think what to say. I don't know is the answer. I do feel with that, though, there is a sort of prove it before it goes on the market. So I had a chat with Demis Hassiblis from DeepMind, and he said nobody should ever have allowed any self-driving car on the market until they could prove certain thresholds. So I think in self-driving cars, but in fake news, that's very different. And it's so difficult to know. And the people who are doing it aren't regulatable. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, so from my side, whenever we talk about information that are being published, for sure, we need to have an objective eye, say, why is it published? Who is publishing it? Can that be fake? Nowadays, since we are totally overwhelmed by the amount of information that we receive and to read on social media, it's just nearly impossible, or it's humanly impossible to distinguish. And that's the reason why technology such as AI can help to make a decision. Honestly, we shouldn't leave the decision to AI as such, but always still the human will take the lead on that, the final decision. We can get help with AI. So I always say AI doesn't replace human, it helps human. It complements. We use AI for good. We use AI to help us in our day-to-day life. And this is a difficult thing to say, okay, well, AI has provided tons of like criteria that is influencing our decision, similar to the breast cancer screening, or similar to the self-driving car. If the self-driving car say, okay, well, that's a wall, but as a human, you see that's not a wall, but that's a window or whatever it is. You need to be in control of the car.
But then that's the question is, how do you regulate that? So how do you regulate for fake news? That's the question. That to me was the question. And I
to make it actually the spreader responsible, not only the spreader, the ringleader, but also to make the social media accountable. I know there are regulations that are coming through, say, okay, social media needs to be accountable to screen, to filter. To make it accountable, it's easy to say, it's hard to implement. You
That's
take one
true.
example. Earlier this year, the EU commissioner was reviewing the code of conduct that was implemented, I think, in 2018 with regards to Facebook, Twitter, and another one I forgot, with regards to the fact that they will be taking all the responsibility to implement those screening, filtering it. And the EU commissioner, I think it was April this year, said after 3 years, he analyzed only Twitter managed to do it like 50% to what they promised. So the incentive to do that, sometimes I was talking to at another meeting earlier this last month, and we're saying how to de-incentivize those private sectors in order in order for them to be liable. And that's actually policy or regulation that probably, say, different stakeholders from the regulators side needs to adhere.
I promised next time we have this discussion, we invite a lawyer that tells us everything we need to know about this.
No, they'll just give us 28 more questions.
Thanks to both. I mean, excellent discussion. I mean, this could probably go on for another hour, but I'm conscious of everybody's time. So I hand it back to Marianne, and thank you again for this excellent discussion.
Thank you, Ekkehard, and also thank you, Paul and Hilary. A big thank you to our audience who bared with us longer than we foreseen at the beginning. Yeah, wrapping up our session today, I would like to thank you for your active participation, and we'll do our homework and see how we can follow up on our discussion of tonight. Let me invite you one more time to join our Geneva Impact event next Thursday on December 16th at 5 p.m. Geneva time, where we define our innovation focus for our upcoming innovation cycle for next year. If you would like to engage in our community and co-shape our work as think tank, you are also cordially invited to become an official member. And please, do get in touch with us. I'm just posting the link for our membership site in the chat. I wish you now, in the name of the entire team, a wonderful end of the year season. And I hope to welcome you soon again, perhaps next Thursday, perhaps on social media or via email. Thank you and bonsoir de Genève.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All the best.